Mike Flanagan's The Fall of the House of Usher is a horrifying, haunting show, perfect for the darkest time of the year. But one of the most interesting elements is the fact that the bugbear of this show is not a devilish contract or the specter of death itself. No, baby, this show concerns itself with the most terrifying thing of all, the inevitable consequences of your own actions. Today, we'll be doing a quick exploration into the lingering, connecting element of this incredibly inevitable story, Verna, or the Raven. Namely, how the Raven in The Fall of the House of Usher is not death or the devil. She is a personification of inevitability and the point of no return, but not one without her compassion, carefully expressed in a deliberately feminine incarnation, though certainly not a woman. It is very tempting to assign the Raven the role of the devil or death itself. However, in both cases, neither of these interpretations fully satisfy what the text is showing us. The devil's main characteristic in stories that feature him is that of temptation. In as early as the story of the Garden of Eden, the devil, as snake, makes a considerable argument to persuade Eve to disobey God's edict about the fruit. Though Eve does have a choice, this persuasion plays a key role in her decision to take the apple. Similarly, in other iconic stories of the devil, contracts and choices play important roles. The devil outlines a vision of something that you want but do not have, and then encourages you to sign your name on a binding contract. Only then is the transaction closed. The devil is a salesman and requires the consent of his business partner to go through with a classic deal with the devil. This is not so for the Raven at all. As the story is told in spellbinding shreds over the course of 8 installments, it takes a while for the Raven's role in the origin story of the Ushers to unfold. But when it does, it is as shocking as any number of the family's horrible, inappropriate deaths. It might be tempting to characterize her as the devil because she appears to propose a deal to the Ushers. But this is an illusion. The Raven does not appear out of nowhere to tempt the otherwise innocent or even evil questioning Ushers. She only appears to them after they've fully committed to horrific acts of betrayal and brutal violence to get their way. After they've passed the point of no return. She doesn't need to tempt them at all. They were already on the fast track to becoming the kinds of people who gain influence in the hell world we live in. Greedy, morally bankrupt, murderous people willing to steal the future from their own children and grandchildren in favor of present dreams of glory. Truly, it would be genuinely a hell of a lot more accurate to characterize Roderick Usher as the devil in this narrative, the king of his own hell who does spend his life tempting people with luxurious gains and conditional support at moral expense, only to drag them to their deaths knowingly. And much like the devil in Dante's Inferno, wallowing in a cold well of self-dug betrayal, Roderick and Madeline's cardinal sin is pride, and we'll also briefly cover the rest of the brood as well. What the Raven is doing in this scene is outlining the inevitable consequences of their choices, the path they are currently stampeding down. Are you willing to sacrifice your children, your grandchildren, for riches in the present? The only thing she does do, really, is reap them. The same as any corvid might pick over a deer foolish enough to stand in defiance of a semi-truck at midnight. But bad, you say? If the Raven is reaping the Ushers throughout the story, how can she not be considered a personification of death? She's there for all their deaths. She even appears as the titular Mask of the Red Death. Well, all that is true. However, there is one thing that is also true about death. Death is inevitable. Like everyone eventually, the Ushers were all absolutely going to die at some point. But this story is fundamentally a tragedy. And the way someone passes out of this world, especially in a story, is more important than the simple fact that they will eventually. And though the Raven appears before each Usher's demise, it's not really as a herald of inevitable death. With every Usher child, the notable exception of Frederick, and we'll get to him, she gives them an opportunity to not die a horrible death, while knowing that they won't choose to do something else. Not because they're bound to their parents' curse, but because they've become the kind of people who don't think consequences apply to them. Really obvious physical consequences you cannot, "Do you know who I am?" your way out of. As the Red Death, she offers Prospero, who consumes and consumes without restraint or consideration, multiple opportunities to do anything else but turn on those sprinklers. As the security guard, she tells Camille correctly, "You don't need to be here. You could walk away from this. You could do anything else." However, Camille is incapable of turning away from her obsessive, heady pursuit of her sister's humiliation, and meets her end getting ripped apart by a wild animal. With the ghost of the slaughtered cat, she repeatedly tells Leo that the cat he wants to buy in order to cover up his drug-fueled violence and mania from his partner is not available. In doing so, she's giving him a chance to be honest about his monster, and he chooses to hide it instead to, well, his detriment. For Victorine, the Raven presents herself as the point of no return by appearing as a perfectly disappearable patient. Victorine now has the option to choose courage and turn away from the doomed project, or leap into depraved medical malpractice on a human being to save her funding situation. With Tamerlane, whose story is situated around eyes and watching and her obsessive hang-ups about how she is perceived and perceives herself, the Raven appears to her as an idealized image of herself, play acting as a better version of Tamerlane, and speaking to her from her own reflection, practically begging her to make better choices. You can still call your husband back. You can still course correct. You can take some rest. Take a nap, bitch. She does, in fact, get to bed, of course, but in a sadly final way. Frederick is the least direct in terms of Verna's direct opportunity, but it does do a lot of things for the series and the Raven's characterization. I'll also go a little bit more into Sloth here because of all the cardinal sins, it's the most arcane and least understood. It's not just laziness, as the depiction of the cardinal sin of Sloth is often described. Classically, Sloth has to do with omitting responsibility and failing to care about oneself or others. Frederick's profoundly self-destructive cocaine habit is one way of expressing this, but the horrific abuse and martyr complex he has towards his wife, enabled by a paralytic no less, is the more impactful way of describing the effects of such a sloth. And like all the others, he does have the opportunity to course correct via Lenore. Though, like the others, he's well past the point of no return by then in terms of committing to the bit, so to speak. The Raven's decision to actively choose a mathematically consistent end for him, though, speaks to her as a being who is capable of being motivated by her constituents. She has a sense of justice and morality and even hope for more, which does separate her from a classic interpretation of pitiless and dispassionate death, even if her last words to Frederick amount to, quoth the Raven. With Lenore, who is the sacrificial collateral of Madeline and Roderick's choices, she offers the best compassion she can. A hopeful, easy death, but one that was still inevitable because Roderick and Madeline are the ones that made this choice. Lenore didn't get a say. It was her grandparents who decided her fate. The Raven was simply reflecting the consequences of their choices. I'm going to take a second to talk a little bit more about Madeline and the femininity of the Raven. As we race to the conclusion of the story, Madeline attempts to renegotiate the non-bargain. The reason I bring it up here is to further drive home the point that the Raven is neither death nor the devil. The portrayal of her behavior and priorities profoundly differ from either. There is also the deliberation in portraying her as feminine. And no, it's not just that Carla Gugino is Mike Flanagan's muse. Probably. Death and the devil are both classically interpreted as masculine figures, although some notable and powerful examples such as Neil Gaiman's Sandman portray Death as a feminine character, though not for the reasons we're getting into here. Frankly, if a man in black showed up with the Raven's role in this narrative, it would have been genuinely muddling, as it would have then become really difficult to separate the symbolic flirtations with the devil and death the image of ravens already have. And those kinds of impressions, both in the meta-narrative and the narrative itself, matter immensely. Madeline, the other massive axis of feminine power, is aware of this. Except with Madeline, whose ironic wish is to never be subservient to a man, she spends the whole show being subservient to one. She's the furthest thing from a girl boss possible. She's her brother's wretched handmaiden. She goes about her goals by buying 1,000% into a man-centric pursuit of power. She doesn't even make a verbal choice in the conversation with the Raven until prompted, even demurring at first. Even while doing murder, she's using very classic forms of feminine warfare. Sexuality, wiles, persuasion, flattery, poison, all in service of solidifying her brother's place in a patriarchal hegemony. She is also the one doing all the emotional labor of keeping the family together, while Roderick is fully checked out of everything that doesn't directly involve his own ego. And the way she goes about this is by fully despising other women and thinking of herself as somehow unbound from femininity itself, which is a classical folly of pride and also showcases the deeply dangerous and profoundly oblivious overlap of white feminism. Like seriously, she tries the woman-to-woman bullshit on something she knows is an eldritch being. Honestly, if anyone is a girl boss in this show, it's Annabelle. She's the one objecting to the sexist bullshit and horrible social norms and says that's unacceptable and walks away. Madeline, however, meekly, however bitterly, says it's just how it is. And this proves that she has accepted it fully and has bought into the patriarchal ideal that men are just monsters, which excuses all of their behavior. Boys will be boys. And yet she's a boss who's definitely in charge. Yeah. Remind me again what pharaohs tended to think of their queens. That's what I thought. The Raven is a being that attaches herself to the rich, powerful, and hubristic, who believe oh so pridefully that they will never die. She is the personification of the adage, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. She is not the one that robs the ushers of their agency in reaching this point. All of them have already made their choices to arrive at her gate. She's the personification of the deal they make with themselves, of fuck the future, I will get mine. She offers them not the choice, which they have already made. She offers the opportunity to either solidify that choice or turn away from it in a mythological sense. But what about Arthur Pym? She offers Pym the same thing, but unlike Roderick, Madeline, or the wretched kids, he refuses to shirk the consequences of his life. A bad life, a horrendous life that has impacted many innocents. A life that aided and abetted the worst of humanity. But the fact that he was able to look at the sum of all of those parts and look at the consequences of that life with honesty, she finds herself thanking him not as a teacher, but as a supernatural being offered the opportunity of a rarely experienced luxury, humility and honesty from the wicked, accepting the natural consequence of their lives. Exactly as she did with all the Usher children, whom she gave an opportunity to avoid death, and none of them took it. But it's important that the opportunity to avoid it was available. The Ushers are, in a broad sense, being punished for their father's crimes, but each child receives a death proportional to the monstrosity of their own lives and personal choices. They may have been seduced by daddy's money, but they had options and every chance to walk away. And for tragedy to have an impact, it must combine the inevitable with the avoidable. And no one, not even the richest and most powerful, can escape the consequences at the very end of it all. As the very sad and also terrible Edgar Allan Poe famously wrote,
"Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend," I shrieked upstarting. "Get thee back into the tempest and the night's plutonium shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore.
Thank you all so much for watching, and to everyone who's with us live, we're so happy you joined us today. What did you all think of the role of the Raven in the fall of the House of Usher? I know lots of people had different interpretations of which people represent which cardinal sin, and not all of them are super intuitive, so be sure to let us know what you think in the comments. Please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all future HALLOWSCREE uploads. Stay safe and warm in this cold season. Happy Halloween, and we'll see you all in the next one. This is the Bat signing off. Trick or scree!